The Roman Empire is, without a doubt, one of the greatest and most influential empires in history. Its journey begins simply, with myths and disputes, but quickly transforms into one of the largest empires the world has ever known. How did Rome go from being a small city to dominating a vast region? And what led to its decline? In this video, we'll explore the origins of Rome, its growth, the leaders who shaped its history, the peak of its power, and, ultimately, how the Roman legacy still remains with us today. Stay with us until the end to uncover the true story behind the Roman Empire. Welcome to Ages and Thrones, a channel dedicated to telling the history of civilizations and countries that shaped the world as we know it. Here we talk about how these empires were born, grew, fell, and the impact they still have today. If you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and comment with your thoughts. We'd also love to hear your suggestions for future topics. Now, let's dive into the content. Chapter 1. From the ashes of myth to the cradle of ambition. Rome's story actually begins in what many consider to be a mix of myth and reality. We can't pinpoint exactly where it all began, but the earliest narratives tell us of two twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. Raised by a she-wolf on the banks of the Tiber River, these young men are more than just characters in a fable. They represent the spirit of survival and the struggle for power that would define Rome for centuries. Rome didn't start with grand ambitions to rule the world, but somehow, it was soon shaped by larger forces. The legend says that after a dispute between the brothers over where to found their city, Romulus kills Remus, and thus takes control of Rome. From there, it's impossible to deny that the city, still small, already shows something unique, a capacity to fight for survival and, later, for expansion. But what truly marked the beginning of historic Rome was the transition from a monarchy to a republic, something not often seen in ancient societies. This moment was crucial in shaping the Rome we know. And the most interesting part? As it became a republic, Rome not only began to fight for its survival, but also for hegemony over the entire Mediterranean. But how did this spirit of conquest develop? How did Rome go from being a small city to an empire that would challenge the greatest powers of its time? This is where the second phase of the story begins. The Roman Republic. An era marked by internal disputes, but also by territorial expansion that would put Rome on the path to a grand, or perhaps tragic, destiny. As Rome expanded, its system of government was also put to the test. Internal conflicts, personal ambitions, and generals seeking power would soon take center stage, shaping the fates of all. Let's see what happened when the Senate lost control of the Republic and a name began to shine brighter than all others. Julius Caesar. Chapter 2. Senators, Gladii, and Ambitions. Rome is transforming. What was once a small city full of myths and legends now gives way to a republic that, despite being young, already shows signs of a grand future. But what does it mean to be a republic in Rome? Essentially, it means shared power. There was no longer a single king, but an elite that alternated in positions of authority, such as consuls and the Senate. However, contrary to what one might expect, what seemed like a collective government soon became a stage for personal ambitions, manipulation, and, of course, grand betrayals. As Rome expanded its territories, the Senate faced the difficult task of maintaining order, but control over the empire was increasingly in the hands of powerful men. It wasn't just the senators and traditional politicians fighting for power, it was also the generals commanding the Roman legions, figures of immense authority who could not be ignored. The situation was becoming tense, but the one who would truly change the game was a name that, at that moment, seemed like just another common citizen: Julius Caesar. He wasn't just a shrewd and ambitious politician, he was also an exceptional general. His victories in the Gallic Wars earned him enormous popularity among the soldiers and the people. And, to make matters worse or better, depending on how you look at it, the Senate began to see Caesar not as an ally, but as a threat to their power. From there, the history of Rome takes an unexpected turn, with the Rubicon serving as the starting point for an era of political instability. And it was by crossing that river, with a phrase that echoes to this day, that Julius Caesar began a journey that would change Rome forever. The Rubicon is crossed, and the battle for power begins now. But what would be the true cost of his pursuit of absolute power? And what would be the impact of this decision on the Roman Republic itself? With Caesar's death, the Republic seemed to be taking its last breaths. But as we will see, what followed wouldn't be the end, but the beginning of a new era. Octavian, the young heir, would emerge as the master behind this change. But he wouldn't be the only one eyeing Rome's throne. Chapter 3. Caesar, the man who almost became a god. Julius Caesar was not just a general. He was a brilliant strategist, a shrewd politician, and above all, someone who knew how to manipulate the game of power like no one before him. His victories in the Gallic Wars earned him immense popularity among the legions, but also made him a feared name in the Senate and among other Roman leaders. The man who, until then, seemed like just an ordinary citizen, was now almost unavoidable. He was no longer satisfied with the traditional positions in Roman government. He wanted more, and much more. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his trusted army, the phrase he uttered became forever etched in history: "The die is cast." But what did this really mean? To many, it meant he had made an irreversible decision to take absolute control of the Republic. There would be no turning back. What followed was a series of internal battles and a true struggle for power. While Rome prepared for civil war, Caesar advanced with his legions, defeating his rivals and consolidating his power. But the Senate, the Roman elite, still didn't see him as legitimate. On the contrary, they viewed him as a threat to the Republic. This clash between the old order and the new leader was inevitable. Then, in 49 BC, after several victories and political tensions, Caesar was named dictator for life. To many, this was the greatest proof of his unchecked ambition, but to others, it was the salvation of an empire already divided and in crisis. How did he go from a great military hero to a possible absolute monarch? And, more importantly, what would be the true cost of becoming the Emperor of Rome? But what seemed like a definitive victory for Caesar would soon become the beginning of a new wave of turbulence. His sudden and brutal death led Rome into a new impasse. Now, the struggle for control of the Roman Empire had only just begun, and the name of Octavian would begin to shine brighter than any other. What would happen to Rome after the death of its great leader? Chapter 4. Augustus, the first emperor of shadows. The death of Julius Caesar wasn't just the end of a leader. It was the beginning of a new phase for Rome, a phase where the empire would begin to take a form very different from the republic everyone had known. When Caesar was assassinated, he left a power vacuum so great that no one could easily fill it. But the young Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted heir, had something no one else possessed: the legitimacy of his lineage and the political skill to navigate the turbulent waters of Roman power. Octavian was not just another name. He knew how to play the game of alliances, manipulation, and patience. While the empire struggled amid civil wars, Octavian, also known as Augustus, gained ground, disguised as modest and even prudent. He didn't rush. Instead, he built his image with wisdom and cunning, always maintaining the appearance of respect for the old republican order, while in reality, taking absolute control. In 27 BC, he finally became princeps, meaning the first emperor of Rome, but without making a big show of it. He took the title Augustus, meaning the revered, and while Rome celebrated the Pax Romana, a period of internal peace, the empire was slowly but irreversibly transforming from a republic into a disguised monarchy. Augustus became the supreme leader, and under his command, ancient Rome seemed to be prospering. But this apparent tranquility came at a price, for there were shadows hanging over Rome. In the name of stability and growth, Augustus didn't hesitate to consolidate his position, even eliminating possible rivals, often with an iron fist, but always masked by an aura of benevolence. The Pax Romana wasn't just a symbol of peace, it was a symbol of absolute control over the empire's destiny. And the most interesting thing was that this new era brought more than just stability. It was also the birth of the Roman Empire, an empire that would conquer lands, civilizations, and peoples, but one that relied on a foundation of absolute power, disguised as democracy. But despite Augustus laying the foundation for an era of prosperity, Rome soon found itself confronted with the emperors that followed. Figures who would transform this golden age into a true theater of luxury, excesses, and tragedies. As emperors succeeded each other, the structure of Roman power began to show its flaws. And that's when Caligula and Nero entered the stage. Chapter 5. Glory, Luxury, and Madness. After the peaceful era of Augustus, Rome entered a turbulent phase, where the imperial throne was occupied by men whose names would echo through history, but not always for good reasons. Caligula and Nero, two of the most eccentric and impetuous emperors in history, represented the darkest side of absolute power. Caligula began his reign with promises of justice and balance, but soon proved to be an unpredictable emperor. It is said that after a serious health scare, his personality completely changed. From that point on, his actions became increasingly bizarre and cruel. One of the most memorable episodes was when he appointed his horse, Incitatus, as a senator, a clear demonstration of his total disregard for tradition and the Senate's authority. Furthermore, Caligula was known for his excesses: orgies, massacres, and a thirst for power that bordered on madness. He not only wanted to be adored as an emperor but as a living god, and his deranged conduct quickly sparked revolt. His brutal death, murdered by his own Praetorian Guard, marked the end of an era of unchecked excess. But as Rome likes to remind us, when one emperor falls, another can rise, and it's not always an improvement. Nero, the last of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, came to the throne while still young, and at first seemed promising. However, it wasn't long before he gave in to his own vices. His vanity and constant extravagances, such as his obsession with art and theatrical performances, turned him into one of the most hated emperors in history. He was responsible for a series of brutal executions, including that of his own mother and wife, and amid a great fire in Rome, Nero was accused not only of negligence but also of watching and even enjoying the destruction of the city. The legend that survives to this day is that, while Rome burned, Nero played his lyre and sang, as if applauding the end of what had once been a prosperous empire. What these ruthless figures show us is that absolute power, when it falls into the hands of an unstable ruler, can quickly turn into a regime of terror. But this wouldn't be the only crisis Rome would face. As the mad emperors ruined Rome from the inside out, the empire, as an entity, began to feel the first signs of wear. The barbarians were at the gates, and Rome found itself divided. What would happen when the empire began to crack? The answer would come from the figure of a new leader, Constantine, the man who would not only save Rome but change the course of history forever. Chapter 6: Crosses, Crowns, and Conflicts. The story of Rome is marked by cycles of rise and fall, but few transformations are as impactful as the introduction of Christianity. What started as a small sect within the empire, viewed with skepticism and even persecution, would soon become a force that shaped the course of Western civilization. In the beginning, Christianity was a threat to the Roman order. The empire, which valued its traditional gods and devotion to the imperial cult, did not look kindly upon a religion that preached the unity of God and, above all, the rejection of imperial authority. Christians were persecuted, martyred, but their unshakable faith not only endured, it spread, gaining more and more followers, especially in the more distant provinces where paganism held less sway. Then, amidst this religious revolt, the figure of Constantine emerges, the man who would transform Christianity from a marginalized religion into a dominant force within Rome. At first, Constantine was simply a general seeking stability in a divided empire. But his encounter with the Christian faith, symbolized by the vision of the cross in the sky before a crucial battle, changed everything. He claimed that, upon winning the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312, the victory had been granted to him by the Christian God, and from that moment on, Constantine not only embraced Christianity but made it the official religion of the empire. This change was revolutionary. On one hand, many in Rome saw it as a blessing, religious peace, the unification of the empire under one faith. But on the other, this new era also brought many challenges. Christianity, now official, became a political power as great as any general or emperor, and its rise would create internal divisions within the empire, as well as questions about the role of the emperor in religious administration. But Christianity wasn't the only change Constantine would bring. His foundation of a new capital in Byzantium, later called Constantinople, would also mark a new era for Rome, an empire now divided between the West and the East, each with its growing identity. The Roman Empire, once proud of its unity, now found itself fragmented, and the battle for supremacy between the two halves was about to begin. But while Christianity was consolidating and Rome saw a new capital rise, a more serious problem emerged. The empire, now so vast, was beginning to tear at its seams. The decline of the Western Roman Empire seemed inevitable, while the Byzantine Empire began to take on its own distinct and autonomous form. What would happen to Western Rome, already facing invasions and disintegration? The answer would come, dramatically, from the approaching barbarians. Chapter 7: Mud, Blood, and Barbarians. What was once a colossal empire, stretching from Britannia to Egypt, now found itself divided and weakened. The Western Roman Empire was no longer the unbeatable war machine it once was. Amid internal power struggles, moral decay, and the constant pressure from barbarians at the borders, Rome was losing its former grandeur. Initially, The barbarians were seen as distant tribal groups, but over time, they became real threats to the empire. Visigoths, Vandals, Huns. These peoples, once only a nuisance to Rome, were now marching forward, hungry for conquest. The Romans tried to resist, but the truth was that their legions were growing weaker, their resources more scarce, and their power more fragmented. The greatest blow, perhaps, came when Rome was sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric in 410. An unimaginable scene for the Romans, who viewed their city as the center of the world. The empire, which prided itself on its invulnerability, now saw its own capital destroyed by barbarian enemies. But this wasn't the last blow. In the following years, the Vandals invaded North Africa, and the Huns, led by Attila, terrorized Roman territories. To make matters worse, Rome was divided between weak emperors, a senate with no authority, and an economy in ruins. With each new invasion, the empire seemed to sink deeper into a swamp of inability to react. It wasn't just the physical empire that was being torn apart, it was also the soul of Rome. What remained of the Roman Empire were fragmented provinces, ruled by leaders who could no longer unify the people under the same banner. Rome, the city that had once ruled the world, now found itself at the mercy of other peoples. And then, finally, in 476, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, Romulus Augustus, was deposed by the barbarian leader Odoacer, marking the official end of an empire that lasted more than 500 years. Chapter 8. Byzantium, the last breath of Rome. While the Western Roman Empire succumbed to the chaos of barbarian invasions, in the east, Constantinople, the former Byzantium, remained steadfast as the last stronghold of Roman greatness. Founded by Constantine in the 4th century, the city would soon become the heart of an empire that, despite losing supremacy in the West, would continue to expand, resist, and adapt. The Byzantine Empire, as it came to be known, was not simply a continuation of Rome. It was a new Rome, marked by religious and cultural transformation. While Rome had been the center of paganism and imperial worship, Constantinople would become the center of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Christianity, now official, was deeply ingrained in daily life, law, and culture, and the empire was governed by emperors who saw themselves as God's representatives on earth. The transition was not simple, and many challenges arose. Constantinople, with its imposing walls and strategic location, was constantly besieged by external peoples. The Persians, the Arabs, and later, the Ottoman Turks pressured its borders for centuries. However, throughout its history, the Byzantine Empire had its moments of greatness, with visionary emperors like Justinian, who sought to restore what remained of the Western Roman Empire. During Justinian's reign, the empire flourished, and he promoted the construction of grand landmarks like the Hagia Sophia, one of the greatest architectural achievements of the medieval world. However, despite its resilience, the Byzantine Empire was not immune to internal conflicts. The division between the clergy and the aristocracy, popular uprisings, and power struggles weakened the empire. Constantinople's wealth, although impressive, also made it a target for greed. And the Pax Romana? Now, it was a distant memory, as the empire was in constant battle to maintain its position in the world. But even in the face of difficulties, the Byzantine Empire didn't simply resist passively. It reinvented itself, adapted, and created new alliances. And this is how, for almost 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, Constantinople remained a symbol of resistance, connecting the Roman legacy with the new realities of the medieval world. And, as incredible as it may seem, the empire didn't end without one more great tragedy. In 1453, the city of Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire and the conclusion of a millennium-long chapter in Rome's history. However, what remained of Rome and Byzantium was much more than just ruins. Its religious, political, and cultural legacy would echo throughout medieval Europe and beyond. But, contrary to what many thought, the fall of Constantinople wasn't the end of Rome. The Roman legacy still lives on in many aspects of the modern world, from law to culture. The real question is, how is it that Rome, which seemed to have been lost to history, is still present in our world today? The answer lies in the remnants they left, and in the way the Roman Empire still echoes in the institutions we know. Chapter 9. Eternal Rome. Traces of a sleeping giant. Even with the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and the fall of Constantinople in 1453, Rome's legacy never completely disappeared. On the contrary, it remained alive, both in the physical structures that survived and in the culture that shaped the modern world. The Roman Empire, through its rites, laws, and institutions, left deep marks that still echo to this day. The foundations of Roman law formed the cornerstone of many legal systems around the world. The concept of citizenship, which was once restricted to Romans, is now a universal right. The idea of republican governments and popular representation also has its roots in Rome. Even in modern democracies, we see the influence of Roman institutions, like the Senate, which, although with very different functions today, is still part of many political systems. And what's even more fascinating, the legacy of Roman culture isn't limited just to politics. Roman art, architecture, and law shaped the development of Western civilization as a whole. If you walk through any major city in the world, you'll see elements that can be traced back to Rome, from arches and columns to forums and squares. Even the Romance languages, such as Portuguese, Spanish, French, and Italian, have their roots in Latin, the language of the Romans. In architecture, the grandeur of Roman structures like the Colosseum, the aqueducts, and the Pantheon continues to inspire engineering works worldwide. Even after centuries of history, these landmarks are still revered as symbols of power, innovation, and resilience. However, the true mark of Rome isn't just in the buildings or the laws, but in the idea of imperialism and dominion that, in one way or another, continues to resonate in the modern world. In the quest for expansion, control, and influence, the history of Rome teaches us valuable lessons. Not just about how to build empires, but about how they can, eventually, disintegrate when there is no longer unity or a clear purpose. And perhaps on some level, Rome still lives in us. In our quest for a better, fairer, and more balanced society, ancient Rome always served as a point of reflection. Its rise and fall continue to be studied, discussed, and analyzed. And to this day, Rome challenges us to ask, what are we building? What is the legacy we will leave for future generations? Rome, with all its triumphs and flaws, remains an eternal presence. Its power may have dissipated, but its influence is everywhere. In the laws we follow, in the words we use, and even in the ideals we strive to achieve. And so, the story of Rome, which began with two twins and spread across the world, ends, but at the same time, does not end. What we saw in Rome is not just an ancient story. It's a story of humanity, ambition, challenges, and triumphs. A story that reminds us that when building the future, we must always look to the past, because like Rome, we too are building something that, one day, will be remembered. And this story continues. With each step we take, Rome still lives. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the Ages and Thrones channel to make sure you don't miss more episodes about the history of civilizations that shaped our world. Leave a like, comment your thoughts, and share your suggestions for future videos. Rome is not the only fascinating civilization, and we have many more incredible stories to tell. See you in the next video.